So let's talk about loans. We're going to talk about a few terms that relate to loans, specifically collateral, maturity, and mortgage. Then we're going to use the TVM Solver with a few very loan-specific questions to kind of talk about, calculating things that aren't just the money, like how long is it going to take to pay off a loan, for example. So we'll start with these definitions. The first one is collateral. So collateral is defined as, and I'll go into this a little bit more detail in a moment, but it's defined as something pledged for the repayment of a loan, or rather, for security, as security, my goodness. So as security for the repayment of a loan, to be forfeited in the event of a default. Okay, and default just means you weren't able to pay or you didn't pay. Okay, so what this means is it's putting something up of value. So, for example, maybe a car, maybe is a boat, maybe it's your house or some other thing of value, and saying, look, I have this thing of value. I promise that if I don't repay this loan, then you can take this collateral instead, right? So if you don't pay the loan, they take your collateral. So if the collateral was your car, they repossess your car. If the collateral was your boat, they repossess your boat, and so on. Okay? So that's why knowing what collateral is important, because if the worst case happens and you default on the loan and you're not able to pay for whatever reason, whether that's because, we didn't plan well or, life changes cause that kind of thing, you have to know what your collateral is so you know what you're liable to lose if you default on that loan. Okay? On the other end of things, we have maturity. Now, a policy, security, investment, that sort of thing, it's said to come to maturity when it comes to the end of its term, right? So it comes to the end of its term. And generally is therefore payable. Right? So if you have a bond put away for, say, 5 years, then at the end of that 5 years, it matures and it becomes payable. Okay? So it's just important to know what that word is, because we're not talking about how mature someone is. We're talking about the maturity of a loan, the maturity of an investment. Now, a mortgage, you have likely heard that word before. You probably know it has something to do with houses. So I'm going to give you a technical definition, then we're going to talk a little bit more about what that actually means. So first, it is a legal agreement. Okay, so there are contracts involved. There are usually lawyers involved. So a legal agreement by which a creditor, right, so that could be a bank, that could be a credit union, whatever broker, lends money in exchange for taking title of a debtor's property Okay, and then with the condition that that the conveyance of title becomes void upon payment of the debt. So that's a whole bunch of technical terms. So let's go through them a little bit, hey? So first, our creditor. So a creditor is just a bank or a credit union. It is someone who gives mortgages, right? There are plenty of people who will want to sell you a mortgage. You'll have no problem finding a creditor. They lend money in exchange for taking title of the debtor's property. And what that means is that when you buy a house, that house you live in, you own, you get to do whatever you want with it, but the title of the property belongs to the creditor, which means that if you don't pay for it, they have every right to boot you out. It's the bank houses now, if you don't pay for it. Okay? However, with the condition that the conveyance of title, so that is, the agreement to give them the title for this period, becomes void, so it stops being their title upon payment of the debt. So once you've paid off your entire mortgage, the bank no longer has any claim on the title, and it reverts back to you. Now, as you're paying down this mortgage, you get a thing called, we won't talk about this too much in this video, but you get a thing called equity. So it's kind of like buying your house back from the bank bit by bit by bit. You own a little bit more each time. Okay, but like in other loans with collateral, if you default on a mortgage, then they have title of your home and they will take it as collateral. Okay, so again, these three terms, very important in understanding how loans work. We're now going to look at a couple examples of how to calculate things relating to loans, and just a couple new ways to use the TVM Solver in relation to loans. So let's take a look at this question. We've got Lawrence, who borrowed $12,000 from a bank at 5% interest, compounded monthly, to buy a new personal watercraft, so buying a boat. The bank will use the watercraft as collateral for the loan. So that means that if he doesn't pay this loan properly, he will lose the boat. So Lawrence negotiated loan payments of $350 at the end of each month until the loan is paid off. Okay. So let's say that, for example, we wanted to know how long until half of the loan is paid. Okay, we'll call that A here. Okay, just to know, what's the halfway point here? So let's enter some information on our TVM Solver. So we know that we got 5% interest, so we enter a 5 under interest. Our present value, we borrowed $12,000. The money is going towards Lawrence, which means that it is positive. Okay, so we have present value of $12,000, and then the payment we have minus $350. It's because the money is going away from Lawrence here, so we're going to be paying out $350, so it's going away. The future value, now this one, it seems like it should be $6,000, since that's half of $12,000. But we have to think about it as, if this is the center of the loan, this is where you owe $6,000, we're really asking the solver, well, what if we just stop paying at this point? How much would we have to pay back, right? So we're paying back $6,000. If we stop paying at this point, we're paying back half of it. So we know that since we're paying it back, it must be negative. I'm just pasting that in to get the negative in there since my keyboard won't do it. Okay, so that must be negative. General rule of thumb, if your present value is positive, your future value will be negative. Okay, payments per year, we've got monthly payments, compounding periods, 12 since it's compounded monthly. Okay, so now that we've got that in place, we just need to find n, since n is our time, our number of terms, our periods here. So we solve for n just by clicking that button, and we get 19.25. Now, what is this 19.25? Well, we know that the compounding periods and the payments per year are monthly, so that must mean that our n is monthly. So that means that this is 19.25 months. Okay, so realistically, that means that in between the 19th and the 20th payment, would be the value that we're looking for, so paying back at least half would be 20 months. Okay? But that's not as common a question as this one, which is, how long until it's all paid back? So how long all paid here? I'm just using short form here since we're talking about it. Okay? So all we have to do is we have to adjust our future value here to be 0, right? So how long until I've paid all of it back and there's nothing left to pay? All right, we just click solve for n to recalculate that, and we get 37.07 months. Okay, so 37.07 months, and so again, you probably will have paid it off in either 37 payments and the last payment will just be a little bit more, or you'll do 38 payments and the last payment will be very tiny. Much more likely 37 payments. The bank will tell you what the schedule is. That is up to the creditor to decide. So it is important that you know what the outcome is there. Okay. This also might just adjust your monthly payments to be like $350 and a few cents, right? So one thing to note here is that since this is half of the time, we'd expect that if we double that, if we double the half, we should get the entirety, how long it should take to do the entire thing. We expect that to be double, except it's not, okay? And this is the reason that I did this particular example, is that you cannot assume that this progression is linear, right? The amount that you're paying back and the amount of the principal that you're paying back over time actually increases. So that means that as you continue on, the amount that on your principal that you're paying goes up, which means that your payments become more effective in paying that debt down, which means that it actually becomes a little bit less time to get to the end from the halfway point. Okay, so that's why these solvers are very helpful, because we don't have to guess. We can solve it. We can figure it out at any point in the loan. You want to know when you owe $1,000? We can find out when you owe $1,000, right? Wherever you want to look in the loan. So let's take a look at this question here. Jose is applying for a mortgage. He needs to make a 10% down payment on the purchase price of $225,000. That's pretty common in terms of the bank saying that you have enough money to do it, right? You need to prove that you are able to create those savings. We'll take the mortgage at an interest rate of 3.75% compounded semi-annually, so twice a year. And then the term will be 20 years with monthly mortgage payments. Okay, that's pretty common for the term to be quite long. In Canada, the maximum is 25 years, and you will usually see a 25-year term. We're just using 20 years here, just as an example. Okay, so first things first, the down payment. Down payment is always first. Now this one, it's not a solver question, so we don't need that solver just yet. So instead, we're just going to find, what is the remaining money that has to be paid if 10% has to be paid up front, right? That'll help us to find the interest later on. So first, let's talk about, how much is each payment going to be? Each payment. So first we have to know, well, what is our present value? How much are we actually borrowing here? So we know that it's going to be $225,000, and we need 10% taken off of that. So to do that, I'm just going to multiply by 1 minus 0.1, so a whole payment minus 10%, which will give us 225,000 times 0.9, which will give us 202,500. Okay, it's just some quick maths here. We also need to know the periods. We need to know how many periods there are. So we have 20 years, and we've got 12 periods per year. Right? So we just multiply those to find the total number of periods. Right, so that gives us 240 periods. So that gives us a present value. That gives us a number of terms. With this information, we should be able to find everything we need for the payments. So let's take a look here. So n, our number of terms, is going to be 240. I, our interest, is 3.75, since that was given in the question. the present value. So this is how much money has been given to us here as a loan. So that'd be 202,500. Oops, that's 5,000. Payments, we're finding those. We don't know yet. Future value, eventually you want this to go to 0. So we will just leave that at 0, right? Because you don't want to owe anything at the end. Payments per year, it's monthly payments, so it's 12. That didn't take. And finally, compounding periods per year, it's semi-annually, so that's 2. Okay, so all you got to do here is just press the payment button, and we're given some payments. So each payment is going to be $1,197.50. And just to double check, no, 55 cents. Yeah, this particular solver likes to hide that last number on you. Make sure you click it to get to it. Okay. So we have it, that's the payment. Note that this payment is negative since it is going away from you, which makes sense. If Jose is paying this, it's going away from him. Okay. So that's how to find a payment. That's pretty quick. But now I'm going to show you the whole part of mortgages that nobody likes to think about. How much interest will end up being paid. Okay, so remember that interest is kind of the charge to borrow money. Okay, so what we need to know is the total amount that we paid. So if we take all of our payments, so 1197.55, multiply the number of payments, so 240, we will get a total of 287,412. So that's how much money was actually paid just in payments on this loan. If we take this total payments and then we take away the original value of just the loan, 202,500, we'll end up with the interest, which is $84,912, which means you paid $84,912 just to borrow that money. Just to borrow it over those 20 years. It's because 20 years is such a long period of time that interest becomes such a significant portion of your loan. For the first few years of a mortgage, you're barely paying principal. You're basically only paying interest because there's so dang much of it to pay down over that amount of time. Okay? Does that mean that mortgages are bad? No. It means that it has to be something that you're aware of and that you're not going into thinking that you're going to be continuously paying down your debt. There's a significant amount of interest, and it requires financial planning to afford that amount of money over 20 years. Okay? The big reason mortgages still happen is because, I don't know about you, I don't have $220,000 just sitting around. So paying this extra fee over 20 years gives us the ability to actually afford this kind of thing. Okay? So let's look at C here, just as a final addendum here. How much was paid in total? Okay, so that's the interest that was paid on top of everything, plus the entire value, because that will include the down payment that you did have to pay at the start, for a total of $309,912. Okay, so again, I don't have that much out of my pocket, but over 20 years, it can be paid little by little. Okay, so that's some examples of dealing with loans, dealing with mortgages, some of the terminology in there, and a few more uses for this wonderfully versatile TVM solver.